You saw that title right, ladies and gentlemen. This is an updated list of every mutator you can equip on your primary or secondary guns in Remnant 2. I'm going to be ranking every single one of them into F through S tiers, although not going into a specific order this time. There isn't really a best mutator in the game because each is designed to only work with a few different weapons. Also, the images used today come from the wiki, which uses the base versions for the numbers. So I'll try to mention the stats they level up to once they're at level 10. Alright, so let's get into this and take a look at the best ways to use each ranged weapon mutator in Remnant 2. Bandit is first up on the chopping block, and this one we're going to place in A tier. When hitting an enemy with bullets, you gain a 30% chance to have ammo sent right back into your magazine. This effect also increases your fire rate, so you're going to run this with weapons containing a decent amount of ammo. Any automatic really is a great pick, as well as the Bulldog or Rupture Cannon. If you want to fire more often before needing to reload, this is never going to be a bad pick. The one downside is that you're not actually boosting damage other than just firing faster, so often other mutators outshine it. However, for guns like the Corrupted Arbalist and Thorn, there really isn't a better option. For Corrupted Arbalist specifically, you almost never have to reload the gun. It bounces quite a lot, giving it a very high chance to feed ammo back in. And on Thorn, it lets you get way more needles out inside the mod's duration for much higher explosion numbers. You can almost boost any sidearm significantly with Bandit by having a trusty sidearm, which rarely ever needs to actually reload. Not really the best option in most cases, but it always contributes much to your gameplay. Battery is a weak spot based mutator, instantly placing it down in the C tier. For every 400 mod power you spend, you gain an increase of 20% weak spot damage, which stacks a total of 3 times for about 60% more damage lasting 10 seconds. Anything to do with weak spot in Remnant 2 is instantly less of an optimal pick. While it is super strong in some instances, there's over half the game where this will not benefit you. On top of that, you can only use this on a few weapons optimally, specifically Nightfall and Corrupted Merciless. Deceit seems like a nice pick, but Supercharger is always better for that gun, no matter what, and I personally use Bullet Weaver on Nightfall. So really, it's Corrupted Merciless, as you're going to be looping that mod as much as you can anyway. It's only powerful in a few fights like Ravager or Annihilation, and isn't something I use often. A 60% boost in damage is nuts, but you'll need to make sure you have 1200 mod power spent for it to get the full boost to damage. Bottom Heavy is a pretty decent option that I never use, placing it at around a B tier. This grants 7% faster fire rate, which increases by 2% for every 10% magazine missing, which is going to translate to the more bullets you fire, the faster you shoot. You will need a lot of ammo to fire out, requiring this to be run on automatics really. While that's also not entirely the case. It's kind of weird, but guns such as Ford's Scattergun could gain huge benefits as 10% of the magazine is every single bullet, meaning you can use it on a lot more weapons than you would think. Several weapons in the game do have super sluggish reloads, which this is going to instantly fix and grant you more damage from making bullets fly faster. Again, we almost always have better options, but this is really nice in general. I found it to be a pretty darn good boost on the Black Maw and Thorn, once again being a perfect option on sidearms if you want them to be ready to fire more often. Personally, the Extender Mutator feels much better anytime this is an option though, as a faster reload is one of the big perks here. Bullet Weaver is an incredible mutator for mod builds, an S tier on the list. This can be used in many different builds, as using a mod increases fire rate by 20% for 15 seconds. This is an enormous boost to fire rate that lasts more than enough time to gain the benefit from it. On top of that, it makes that weapon have 15% increased mod generation. If you're going to be actively using a gun to regen mods, then boom, perfect fit. Instead, there is actually another way to run this. Nightfall. Nightfall has a mod that takes forever to regen. The gun also performs very poorly if you don't boost its fire rate. Equip this with Leaking Gemstone Ring, and now you deal more damage, regen the mod while it's active to have at least 90% uptime, and have that benefit the entire time your mod is active. This is the single best use for Bullet Weaver in Remnant 2, but like I mentioned, it's just great in general for getting mods back. Most of the time, you'll use it for active mods that have a duration, like say the Familiar or Ring of Spears. One of them gets feedback, of course, but the other can regen very quickly with the Black Maw firing as support. Oh, and how could I forget Anguish needs this mutator, making it one of the best sources of damage in the game. Like, don't even use Anguish without Bullet Weaver because it's that good. Charged Wounds is one of the newer mutators and one that deals elemental damage, which is awesome to see it be in the S tier placement as well. Fetid Wounds used to be the best mutator for elemental guns, but that got heavily over-nerfed to be just good now. Charged Wounds, on the other hand, works perfectly with this Sparkfire shotgun and Enigma SMG. Overloaded targets in the area cause the weapon to have 5% increased fire rate and reload speed, which stacks 5 times for a 25% increase to both. Dealing crit or weak spot damage also applies overloaded, so now any gun in the game can apply one of the strongest status effects. So build around that and you could apply over 1000 damage from really a single shot. The reload and fire rate are kind of weird because the status often kills enemies before you can reload and gain the benefit. And we already have the Krell Axe to apply overload on status builds as well. Still, this does somehow manage to top the other status appliers. Just blast away with Sparkfire and it wipes crowds if Ritualist is your prime class. Also, it kind of just doubles Enigma's effect it already has, so you really want this guy for sure. Deadly Calm we don't need to spend much time on, as it's one of the very few F tier options. This is almost the worst mutator in the game, requiring you to aim for 3 entire seconds for an increase of 25% more range damage. The main problem with it is that this is an older mutator before Gunfire decided to give us active mutator buffs under our stamina bar, meaning that after the 3 seconds finally gets taken into account, you have 0 ways of knowing. Also, 3 seconds is longer than you would think, especially in combat, and often you're going to need to dodge every 3 to 5 seconds in boss fights anyway. Basically, this never actually gives you its benefit, and even if it does, you can't really tell. If you absolutely have to use this though, then Monorail is probably the best option. Detonator is a really cool mutator most people really like. Sadly, its performance is below optimal, landing it in D tier. D for Detonator, get it? When equipped, each 10% of your weapon's magazine will cause an explosion of 10 damage. It also increases weapons' explosive damage by 20%, which is an instant major red flag. How many guns in the game actually deal explosive damage? Well, actually a ton of them. Gunfire, for whatever reason, really loves explosion damage, but anytime you have explosions tied to a mod, it's always better to go with Harmonizer, Feedback, or Failsafe. Ruling out every single explosive mod build leaves us with 3 different options: Thorn, Meridian, or Corrupted Meridian, which all 3 have terrible main fire modes you should never build around. Thorn is the best pick because while its mod far outshines the main gun, at least the main fire is decent. But again, options like 1000 Cuts or Bandit is far better, so that's out. And for both versions of Meridian, you're going to run the gun for mod damage. The main fire modes do explode, but it's nearly pointless to build around as the mods are always better, which leaves us with no gun in the game that benefits from its 20% more explosive damage. Instead, you're just going to throw this on to have free explosions happen. Best use on this is the double barrel, as each shot is going to explode for decent numbers if you build around it. And technically, it could work on anything, but it's never a great pick. I believe this was included so we can throw it on Genesis for an exploding bow that I've been asking for like ever, but it doesn't even work at all because Supercharger is the only thing you can run on bows really. So huge swing and a miss on this mutator that can at least be fun to try and use. Dreadful is another mutator you should pretty much stay away from, being in the D tier section as well. This increases range damage by 20% if you have 50% gray health present. You also gain 25% faster reload with any gray health present as well. Now, gray health builds, don't get me wrong, are viable after DLC 3. Not just that, they're really freaking strong actually, but this is never the way to go. You still want Momentum or 1000 Cuts for automatics, you still want Slayer for single shot weapons. Like in general, if this is all you have and you're making a gray health build, yeah, go with it. But literally no one will ever find themselves in that state. By the time you can even think to build around gray health, you have most of the mutators in the game. So while in theory this could be an option, nobody uses it and nobody should. Extender is one of the most versatile mutators we have, being in the A tier division. What this does is increase your magazine size by 45% and increase reload speed by 20%. So instantly you're going to notice no boost in damage here. Mutators are a prime slot for more damage, so that's a major reason not to run it. But on the flip side, this feels so darn comfy. You have much more ammo and reloading so much faster is awesome. Specifically, the Coach Gun and Double Barrel are the best picks for this. Each has terribly slow reloads at base, and with this can be increased to 3 bullets at a time instead of 2. Both feel incredible in combat with Extender, but that's just my favorite picks. In theory, any weapon can make use of it. Best use is probably going to be on sidearms most of the time, as it'll feel really reliable that way. I dare you to try it on the Tech 22. It is amazing. Forward Scattergun is nice here as well, but don't use it on single shot weapons. 45% instead of 50% means it just doesn't give you any more ammo on them. But if it isn't single shot, Extender is more than a good option. Failsafe is a pretty strong option for mod builds that I would place in A tier. This grants a 25% increase in mod damage and a 15% chance to not consume the mod charge. You do gain the highest possible increase to mod damage here, obviously that's going to be nice. Then you can pair it up with a Rita Vaught amulet and now you have a 35% chance to not consume mod charges, which works really well for guns like Enigma that already have 7 charges. You could easily get 10 to 12 sometimes, which is really nice. And that's it. You're relying on the RNG of please don't use my mod and a super high damage bonus. Problem is, most mod builds need feedback as that is close to required to boost mod generation. Then you're going to run Harmonizer, which gets almost the same damage boost but a much more consistent level 10 effect. Also, for any single charge mod, you really don't want to use this. Not many charges for it to proc the effect, although it's been done in the past with the mod on Starkiller. Always an option for mod builds, but personally I think it loses out to feedback and Harmonizer. Not by much though, let's make sure we take that into account. And do try this with the concussive shot mod. It's the wackiest thing you'll ever try. The knockback is hilarious. Farsighted is a tough one for me because personally I've never made a build with it and I never will, but theoretically it's in the B tier range. This increases range damage by up to 25% the further you are from the enemy, and increases your weapon's ideal range. Which, the ideal range thing is a terrible level 10 perk for sure, the main downside of the weapon, but 25% damage as long as you're not 10 feet from the enemy ain't half bad. For shotguns, yeah, that's not the best thing in the world because you often will want to be close, but on something like the Wrangler it feels okay. Another situation where if you are using it, then fine, you're not really wasting your time, but man, there is literally going to be a better option around every corner. Extender alone is far better in my mind just for utility. Feedback is the uncontested best mod-based mutator in Remnant 2, standing atop the S tier, almost an S+ as well. This has a description that you don't even need to worry about at all. All you need to know is that when using your mod, you generate more mod power. It is that simple. It can almost be used with any mod really. It can make any Archon build twice as effective, and it even works on duration-based mods as long as Archon is prime. Usually for build crafting, you do want to place it on the mod which is going to deal the most damage and do that damage more often. So something like the Bomb Trap can fully regen itself, Familiar and Ring of Spears will do the same, Prismatic Driver or Helix are going to get a full charge back just from being used, things like that. You want to make sure you have something that deals great damage to at least one or more targets like Tremor or Firestorm. Fetid Wounds used to be the best ranged mutator in the game when it came out. Sadly, it's another instance of over-nerfing, bringing it down to B tier. This will grant you an increase of 3% crit chance for each status on the enemy. Also, any crit or weak spot hit will apply Corroded, which makes it great for status builds like the Charge Wounds option as well. The main problem is that when it came out, this was 5%, meaning you could place it on the Sparkfire shotgun, select a mod that did shock like Overflow, and boom, you have 15% more crit chance at the max benefit. Perfectly balanced and only worked that way on the Sparkfire unless you used Krell Axe, granting it similar potential with any gun with an open mod slot. Now, however, you need 5 different statuses on a target instead of just 3 to gain the max benefit. Not even Miasma can do something like that, and it's the skill for status application. It just means that for a lot of builds using this, you're never going to have the full crit chance effect. It's almost required to slot the new wired inhibitor ring so that slow gets added in as well. Now you get up to 15%, but it's far less viable than it was before. And again, this is only a problem due to over-nerfing. Charge Wounds requires nothing to be S tier, but this here requires a very specific status build. Amazing mutator for that build, but now it's either Sparkfire or pretty much just don't run this. And I think it's outclassed by our new shock option as well anyway. Ghost Shell is another weak spot option which honestly is the exact same as Battery. An easy C tier without question. Every third weak spot hit deals 40% more damage, and you gain 15% extra weak spot crit chance. We already talked about how weak spot is not reliable enough as a damage source to beat other mutators. And funnily enough, the only 2 guns good with Battery from earlier are the only 2 guns good with Ghost Shell. You run Nightfall or you run Corrupted Merciless. Both work decently well off a weak spot and can at least work with the 40% increased damage from every third shot. I recommend only using this mutator if you specifically want to use it. There's always better options, and if your third shot doesn't crit, well, it's not even that great to begin with. This would be a lot better if fusion rifles and bows didn't require the supercharger mutator. There just isn't a lot of room for this to even be given a chance. Harmonizer is one of the best mod mutators in Remnant 2. This sits as an S tier option I rarely run without. The attached mod deals 20% more damage, and now you generate 25% more mod power for the stowed weapon. Similar to Failsafe in that the lesser perk is a flat damage boost. You throw it on for mods that deal damage and literally cannot be hurting your builds. At the same time though, mod power for stowed weapons is fantastic. This makes mod swapping much smoother, while also making mods come back if you're playing into skills instead. The only consideration is, does this mod deal damage, because if it doesn't, then Harmonizer just isn't for you. But Harmonizer and Feedback play with each other very nicely, having been a combo for mod builds since the very beginning, really. Hidden Power is the most underrated mutator that I don't use, but it's pretty useful. I would even go as far as to give it an A tier ranking. This is going to grant you 25% more range damage after that weapon is stowed for 2 seconds. The buff lasts 7 seconds, and the best part of the gun is that it auto-reloads as long as you have it stowed for 2 seconds. Which is weird at first, don't get me wrong, but man, you don't ever need to reload your main gun. Optimally, you're going to use this on guns with decent ammo count, but not too much. So like Bulldog, Wrangler, Ford Scattergun, or even a few sidearms like Redeemer or the Western Classic. This way you can make use of their 7-second long damage buff and let you avoid their long reload times, leading to kind of forced gun swapping. But it's not all that aggressive. You do have to still reload the secondary gun, which kind of feels weird, but never the primary. Could be pretty neat with Refunder on the smaller gun or Bandit for artificial no reloading. And it is true, you're not going to get more damage out of this than you are with other options. But still, it's a lot better than I originally thought. Ingenuity is the worst mutator that you're going to be forced to use. This thing gets a D tier ranking mainly because the devs didn't give it a chance. This is almost the only mutator we have for heat generation weapons. Anything that has a bar underneath it building up as you fire the weapon. This includes the Bone Saw, Plasma Cutter, Repair Tool in both cube guns. So the Plasma Cutter has a mod on it that completely fixes its own heat generation, and the Repair Tool doesn't need it either as the heat isn't very aggressive. The heat generated is reduced by 30% and you get a massive boost of reload speed based on how much heat is actually active. Bone Saw, you can use the microcompressor ring and avoid this guy, so that's the problem. You don't actually want to use this, because it has no increase in damage at all, which is a major problem with all heat generation items. Instead of increasing damage, they increase or decrease heat generation, leaving these types of weapons to be unable to compete with even basic options like the Black Maw. Ingenuity is required on the Corrupted Cube Gun because otherwise it's unusable as a weapon, and both the Bone Saw and Cube Gun want it, although it's bad overall for them. Plasma Gun is just a different beast altogether because it's one of the best DPS weapons in the game. But to basically sum it up, the buffs provided by Ingenuity are terrible, we just have to use it for certain weapons. Insulator is by far my favorite mutator in this game, which is going to give us an S tier for massive versatility. This grants you a small amount of shield over your health every time you spend 10% of your magazine. In general, your range crit chance is 10% higher as well if you have some shield, so this allows you to gain both a little defense and a little damage at the same time. Very rare is it to find a single item that can do this. While this doesn't let you get any higher than 25% of your health as shield, it's more than enough to keep you protected from many attacks, especially since after you lose shield, just firing your gun gives it back. Really easy to gain this benefit, and it's very strong for surviving high damage attacks, preventing death hits. Best gun to use this on by far is the Coach Gun, because only a single shot is needed for the max amount of shield. I personally like it on the Black Maw auto rifle or really any sidearm, but the one distinction to care about is low ammo count. For example, putting this on the Bone Saw would be a terrible idea. It's got so much ammo you're never going to be getting your shield back. But yeah, the Coach Gun is just 25% of your health as shield instantly every time, and it can make a nasty Hunter Warden build, or even Gunslinger Warden for that matter. Kill Switch seems pretty bad at first, but it's surprisingly useful on many builds. I would give it about a B tier, I think. This makes it so switching to this weapon creates an explosion dealing 250 damage. It can only happen once every 10 seconds, although kills with the explosion reduce the cooldown by 1 second. So this immediately sounds gimmicky, but it really isn't. You can throw it on any build that you might want a little extra something for when enemies get in close. It will almost always stagger foes, and on certain builds, mainly those built around explosions, it'll defeat anything near you by itself. Best way to run it is with the Challenger or Summoner classes, then just make sure to use mods and mutators that explode for your other weapons. This makes Kill Switch ready more often and increases its power drastically. It's true that this is almost never going to be the best pick for you, but I found it to be very valuable when I need instant damage and nothing else is ready. And there's something to say about how much fun you can have when you equip the Amplitude trait. Lively is a tricky little bugger that you mainly want to stay away from. Not unusable being in the C tier, but not great. This is one of those descriptions that's kind of all numbers and no explanation, so let's just say that dealing damage increases damage and reload speed for a time. It's kind of a loop item where you need to deal damage to increase reload speed, and then reloading increases range damage. There's only one way to use this that I know of, and that would be with Enigma. Problem with our favorite Shock SMG is that the item has a painful reload time. Without Gunslinger as your class, it's almost unbearable. terrible. Lively works really well to boost the gun's performance on two fronts. You get a much faster reload for the gun and make it hit a lot harder. Personally, I think Charged Wounds is better, although because enemies die quickly, that isn't so reliable. Other than this, stay away, but when me and Chaos Gaming found out about this niche potential, we started to see a lot of excellent results with Enigma, almost as if it was back in its prime when the game released. Maelstrom is a huge boost for status builds, that's for sure. I don't think it's the strongest option though, so we'll slot it in A tier. This increases elemental damage by 10% for each status on the enemy, so a max of 50% more damage should be the cap if I'm correct. Then at level 10, your elemental damage and statuses generate 20% more mod power. You're going to use this on 3 guns: Sparkfire, Nebula, RIP little buddy, and Hellfire. All 3 weapons deal pure elemental damage, and with Ritualist as your class, you can easily get massive boosts to elemental damage here. But on the surface, that's it. You boost status by a lot and kind of leave home without anything super special. That is, except Sparkfire with Maelstrom equipped is one of the fastest ways in all of Remnant 2 to generate mod energy. All you need to do is shoot Sparkfire with this Mutator on, and mods generate in 2 or 3 shots. Obviously, this works best with Archon, of course, but when you just can't get mods fast enough from other sources, this is an instant fix right off the bat. It also means that status damage over time from Krelax and Miasma help you as well, which gets crazy in boss fights as you're proccing statuses the entire time. I think it's best used for spamming mods like Scrap Shop, very powerful when used this way, and just an all-around beauty for status builds in general. Momentum was once the strongest mutator of all because it was broken and granting like way more damage than intended. This was in the game for an insane amount of time, we could not believe it. Now, it still manages to be in the S tier after it's been fixed. Critical hits with your weapon increase critical damage and chance by up to 20%. The basic idea around this mutator is that you get far more critical damage and chance for automatic weapons. Anything that fires a lot of bullets is going to ramp these stacks up to give you a massive boost in damage. Now, the problem with this is that 1000 Cuts came out and it does the same thing, but better for automatic weapons. So now how do you use this? Instead, you're going to place this on items that can multi-hit. The perfect example of this is the Redeemer pistol. The Redeemer fires 3 bullets every time you pull the trigger, so it can proc momentum 3 times in a single second. This allows you to max out your 20% damage very quickly and efficiently. Guns like Redeemer, the Pulse Rifle, Corrupted Aphelion in its ranged form, Enigma, and Anguish in its ranged form. You also want to be able to reload fast enough that the extra damage doesn't fall off, as it resets after 5 seconds. It's a very strong damage boost that lets guns more easily hit crit for Hunter or Gunslinger builds. And while not necessarily the instant pick it used to be, you can still manage to get some ridiculous power out of it. Nearsighted is one of those, that's a thing, kind of items. It's about a D tier, honestly. When equipped, the weapon will have increased range damage by 20% to enemies within 7 meters. You also get 10% higher crit chance within this range as well, translating to you have more damage when close to enemies, and immediately no one uses this. There is no consistent way to stay close to enemies all the time. Why do you think the Challenger class has one of the highest damage buffs, but it requires being close to enemies? It's not very reliable. And for Challenger, that's fine because especially with melee builds, you try to be close anyway, but on a ranged weapon it feels counterintuitive. Only option I found to work with this was Ford's Scattergun. That weapon has a larger reticle size, making it contribute more when you're up close. Slap this on and now you try and force yourself to optimize this damage all the time. I don't know, in actuality staying close on purpose isn't that hard, but when Alepsis Tora flies a million feet away from you, no more damage. Again, weapons that could use this, I personally would use Extender more, I think. Pressure Point is an option I don't ever touch, but a buddy of mine really likes it, so I'll give it a B tier. Your ranged and mod damage is increased by 15% when close to enemies, but this time activating a mod triggers an explosive blast for 50 damage every 100 mod power spent. So you do have the downside of requiring close range again, but instead you get some added pizzazz. Explosive damage like this isn't large at all, but this one is very spammable. All you need is high enough mod regen to get your mod back quickly, and this will deal consistent damage and stagger on top of whatever your mod is already doing. So options like Tremor, Song of a Fear, Space Crabs, Concussive Shot, Bomb Trap, Scrap Shot, mods you could easily use up close and personally every few seconds. Specifically, Concussive Shot and Space Crabs let you build into Pressure Point the most efficiently, as both explode and can regen in seconds without much help. Oh, and Sorrow, of all things, lets you heal and defensively explode enemies on each mod activation. I think it adds a lot to that weapon. You should definitely try it. Prophecy is a decent option. This one is fine at around a C tier. Using your weapons mod increases mod generation by 6%. This can stack 5 times for an enormous boost to mod generation. But then you have the level 10 perk increasing movement speed by 3% per stack. Now don't get me wrong, movement speed can be far more valuable than you might think, but also no. Movement speed in general feels very tacked on here, doing very little to benefit a mod build you have to run this with, because once again you're using it with mods containing multiple charges. This will have you regen them quickly and help to regen other mods as well. Space Crabs, Helix, Skewer 2.0, Astral Burst, they all work here. A decent mod build with feedback will not need this, and it doesn't feel all that good without Archon for other uses either. Especially since the new amulet reaction chain makes mod generation completely obsolete, this won't see much light of day. Though there are times just a little more mod power is needed and you have this to back you up. But come on, movement speed, that doesn't even make sense for this item even a little bit. Refunder is crazy for certain guns. Specifically for utility, it's a nice B tier. Refunder makes it so shots from your weapon have a 50% chance to be returned to your reserves. When this happens, there's a 25% chance ammo is added to your stowed weapon. I only know of a few uses for this, the best by far being with Savior and the SMG. Using this on the SMG will quite rapidly refill ammo in Savior. Since that gun eats through its own ammo reserves in literally 10 seconds, you can almost get all of that ammo lost back with no ammo bricks. And you're dealing damage while this occurs. It's not great for damage, and it won't work great for boosting automatic weapons since those require too much ammo. But for guns like Deceit, Savior, maybe even some of the bows, they run out so quickly. And instead of getting into a rough location trying to pick up a brick, you just swap and start spraying. Do that a few times and swap back for a full set of ammo in your main gun. Do I see any use outside of this? No, but it's really good for what it does, and I've come to really enjoy it in longer boss rushes for specifically Savior and Deceit. Repercussion is the only other mutator you should absolutely stay away from altogether, sitting in the very bottom depths of F tier. No one is really sure why this item exists. No one is really sure how you use it or why you would use it. Each enemy hit by primary fire grants a stack that increases range damage. You can get up to 5 stacks, but shooting loses those stacks. You also get more crit chance for each stack. But here's the thing, one single shot is going to gain and lose all the benefits of this mutator. It seems like the only gun even able to throw this on is Arbalest. Each stack gains you a damage boost and then is used on the next shot. Guess what? Momentum is far more reliable on this gun and gives a similar damage boost. Not to mention, nobody runs this gun for range damage anyway. It's a mod gun only really. So unless the developer who worked on this comes out and says, hey, this is why we made it and how it's supposed to work, yeah, you don't need to get it, and it really doesn't even need to be in the game. Searing Wounds is the worst status mutator while still being an okay option. I would slot it in C tier. This increases range damage by 10% to burning targets, also making ranged and weak spot hits apply burning. You have Charged Wounds to apply shock, Fetid Wounds to apply acid, Twisting Wounds to apply bleed, and Searing Wounds here to apply burning. Out of all of them, Searing Wounds is the worst, mainly because fire damage doesn't do much for you. Shock deals massive damage and greatly boosts the effectiveness of your weapon overall. Even after Fetid was nerfed, it still grants an increase in crit chance, which is almost always stronger than straight range damage. Plus, Corrosion makes enemies take 10% more damage as well. And Bleed works really well with different rings and amulets. Searing just exists. If it was all you had, yeah, it works well with status range builds, and applying a status with 0 effort is nice. But every other status is far better, and even when making a fire only build, you won't use this as we have guns that explode for thousands of fire damage at a time. It's definitely good, but not nearly strong enough to compete with its brothers. Sequence Shot is very easy to understand and is only used on 3 weapons in total. Honestly, it's an A tier when you really need it. This makes charging weapons fire faster and you get more crit chance when doing so. The distinction here is between this item and Supercharger. Supercharger is the only mutator for bows, Savior, and Deceit, while Sequence Shot is only used on Bolt Driver, Alpha Omega, and Corrupted Deceit. And that, to get started, is all you need to know. End of story. Sequence Shot ramps up as you fire bullets, so guns like Bolt Driver that let loose several bolts at a time quickly ramp up Sequence Shot. In the past, this item was bugged to work with bows as well. That was 100% a bug and since has been fixed, so now you have 3 total guns to use it on. And that's totally fine because it means you know exactly when to run it. Bolt Driver especially is a monster with this and the mod Overflow equipped. That thing shoots faster than anything and has amazing damage. Slayer is another very easy item to understand. It's not always used, but definitely an S tier when thrown on. You're only ever going to use this for single shot weapons. If it has one bullet in the magazine, congrats, this is the pick for you. If it even has 2 bullets, stay away from this. Reloading will increase the damage of your next shot by 25%. This lasts only 3 seconds, so you need to be firing one shot right after the other. On top of that, reload speed is increased by 15%. Sure Shot Pistol, the Widowmaker Sniper, Spore Bloom Shotgun, and basic crossbow are almost always going to use this. It is a very easy way to boost their damage because each weapon now reloads fast enough to shoot within 3 seconds. Feels amazing on those items, although Spore Bloom is the only other one you might throw another Mutator on. Just depends, really. Sleeper is a very powerful option that also behaves in a weird way. I leave it at around C tier. This makes your weapon empowered after it's been stowed for 5 seconds. When you pull it back up, your weapon is now going to have 25% more crit chance and 15% more crit damage for 10 seconds. You're pretty much going to be using your sidearm as often as your main weapon for this type of play. Stow the Bulldog shotgun, pull up Rupture Cannon or something else and wait for the empower to come back. Once it shows up, the damage you get is really high and it can grant some amazing burst damage. But I don't play like this, and I don't know many who do. It doesn't reload your guns either, so hidden power feels more fun to work around even though Sleeper is stronger. Get used to it, and sure, the results are going to be really nice. I would rather not mess with specific timings like this though. It's more work than a build really needs to have. Spellweaver is the mutator you throw on if you're playing into skills, which I would say gives it an A tier. This increases your weapon's mod damage and generation by 15% when activating a skill. Using a mod will also cool down skills by 1% for every mod power spent. I like to run Invoker Prime, Gunslinger, or Ritualist Secondary, and there you go. Now run a mod like Creeping Mist, which has high mod power, so using it grants more damage and makes skill cooldown even faster. Because Invoker builds have near infinite skill cooldown, but only near. You need just a little bit extra from Spellweaver to push it over the edge. You can also throw this on any mod build and have skills come back slightly faster. It's actually quite versatile for Archon users in general. While I personally would never come within 10 feet of Spirit Feeder, it might be okay. It could be me being gracious here, but C tier seems to fit. Reloading increases your attached mod damage by 30%. Casting your mod increases reload speed. So like a ranged mod hybrid build gets its best mutator ever, but what build even is that? I imagine Merciless can make the most out of Spirit Feeder because the range damage and mod damage are already very good. You do want a better reload on that gun already, and 30% more mod damage would demolish bosses for sure. A little too niche, as most mod users tend to like mod spam or explosion status mixes, though a specific build around this alone could be highly effective. I'd actually like to see some more of that, I think. Spirit Healer is a nice option for survivability. Not amazing, but B tier ain't half bad. Every 50 mod power spent regenerates 2% health over 10 seconds. Allies will receive half of this healing if they're near you, so you will probably have seen someone use this with Prismatic Driver as it lights up the underside of your stamina with 30 buffs of healing. While that is kind of cool to see, it's virtually worthless. Prismatic Driver has incredibly low mod costs, so you're not actually getting hardly any healing from each mod use. This equates to multiplying 10 times 0. 10 times a number is a lot, but with 0, it's still nothing. Instead, you'll likely want to run it with Tremor. I tested a lot of options, and that is by far the best pick. You get 2 mod charges with plenty of mod power, so each use actually generates a powerful amount of healing. Problem is, this is just a side thing. There are far better ways of getting healing for mod builds. Even the simple encrypted ring can do much better. So I would never personally recommend using Spirit Healer. Though if you truly don't have a decent mutator option, it can stop you from wasting so many relics, which does come in handy. Supercharger is the best mutator in Remnant 2 if we could actually use that title. This is definitely an S tier option. This decreases charge time for bows and fusion rifles by 30%. It also makes charge shots gain 15% crit chance. You will have this as an auto slot for any bow in the game: Deceit, Savior, Monorail, and sometimes Bolt Driver. Bolt Driver is unique in that when you're using Sequence Shot as a main weapon, you'll need Supercharger for the sidearm instead. But in general, this is a required item. If you don't speed up bows, they feel terrible. Even if you fully build into charge time with the Archer's Crest Ring and Worn Dog Tags Amulet, your weapon still needs Supercharger. Especially when running bows, you are absolutely shooting yourself in the foot by not equipping this. And that nice crit chance boost is always noticeable for sure. Superheated is the villain we didn't want or need. Usable, but try not to because it's D tier at best. This isn't even worth explaining based on the description. You have to use it on heat generating based weapons. So the best picks are going to be cube guns, bone saw, repair tool. As heat builds up, you're going to let out explosions. Once max heat generation has been met, your gun pulses, letting out burning onto the enemies and yourself. If you needed another example to prove gunfire has no idea what to do with heat generation, well, here it is. This item has you overheat your weapon for one of the longest animations in the game where you can't do anything but dodge, and when you do so, it deals damage to you. This also provides no damage boost to the gun and will only be boosted if you go into explosions. You absolutely can beat bosses with this because explosions are very strong. But wow, they really missed the mark with Superheated. Nobody ever wants to overheat their weapon in this game, and everyone knows there's 30 far better explosion builds than this item can make. And of all things, why would you make it place damage on the user? I have no idea at this point. I'm starting to feel like this is just a joke item. 1000 Cuts is an absolute monstrosity for automatic weapons. This gets one of the highest ranking S tiers possible. This mutator ramps up as you fire bullets. As it ramps up to 50 stacks, you're going to max out at 25% more crit chance and damage. Then each stack increases reload speed by 1%. This makes it the best mutator in the game for automatic weapons. Anything with lots of ammo now instantly reloads after you get done firing, and has the highest possible boost to crit chance and damage at the same time, greatly improving functionality and DPS for guns like Plasma Cutter, Bone Saw, Chicago Typewriter, Monarch, and Monolith. Specifically, Plasma Cutter and Monarch are the best guns to run here, as they spray out millions of bullets, ramping up the damage quickly and making use of that damage for a long time. Then the instant reload is icing on top of a delicious cake. You don't want to run it much with weapons that have low ammo, so while something like the Tech 22 has automatic fire, it won't actually ramp up all the way to the 50 stacks. Most of the time, stay away from sidearms altogether for this one, as none of them have much ammo. But man, this is such an OP item for anything with at least 50 ammo. Time Wave is the item I really want to be good, but it just isn't. Sorry, but the old gal gets a D tier. This increases range damage by 20% to slow enemies. Using a mod, it now applies slow for 5 seconds. But here's the problem. It can only happen once every 10 seconds, and you need to be really close to the enemy. If you literally have no other options for slow, okay, throw it on to stop enemy advancement and make shots easier to make. But the second you get a ring called Wired Inhibitor, throw Time Wave in the trash. Time Wave, unironically, has a large period of time where it will do nothing, instantly making it bad. Slow is amazing when you use correctly, and before DLCs, this was one of the very few items to apply it. Now, however, it is both unreliable and heavily outclassed in every way. Top Heavy is quite powerful for a variety of weapons. I would give it an A tier, I think. This grants you an increase of 15% range damage and 20% weak spot damage based on how close your magazine is to full. So on the Black Maw, you would have a massive boost in damage to your first bullet and then no damage boost at all by the time your magazine runs out. Instead, you're going to run this on low shot weapons. Single shot weapons obviously are going to be the best as they keep that max bonus no matter what, but Coach Gun can fit here as well, holding on to only 2 bullets. You have the double barrel, possibly monorail, anything that has under 5 bullets benefits enough to make Top Heavy worth it. Spore Bloom seems to be the best pick as that shotgun already hits with massive numbers. It competes a lot with Slayer, but you do want at least 2 options for build variety in case both your primary and sidearm fit into the same category of weapon. Transpose is, well, something we should talk about, I guess. At best, I'd say it's a B tier. Gaining ammo increases range damage by 15%, and new ammo gained goes directly into the weapon's magazine, which is much worse in terms of buffs than almost any other decent mutator. You want to rely on picking up ammo to get your damage buff? Not likely. However, there is a kind of cool way to use this mainly for the level 10 perk. Run it on sidearms. This should allow you to never reload your sidearm at all, always having your sidearm ready for when you need to reload your main gun or don't have ammo for it. If reliability in your sidearm is important enough to you, I could recommend Transpose. Extender immediately feels far better to me, and by the end game you have unlimited ammo boxes. Still, it's an option that isn't bad per se and can provide nice ease of use, which I find important. For our final mutator, we have Twisting Wounds, which isn't quite the best, but definitely an A tier. This causes range damage to deal 10% more damage to bleeding targets, and crit or weak spot hits now apply bleed. Twisting Wounds was once one of the best mutators upon this game's launch. There are a variety of items in Remnant 2 that boost your build when bleed is in the mix. Literally anything having to do with status, Abrasive Whetstone Amulet for massive crit, Ravager's Mark Amulet for overall damage, Atonement Fold for bleeding yourself, Ravager's Bargain for more crit and damage when bleeding, and Blood Tinged Ring for health regen around bleeding enemies. Bleed has a lot of uses, not all of them just being for damage. And of course, throwing this on the fan favorite Merciless applies 2 stacks of bleeding instantly, which is really strong. Which, yeah, Merciless and Sparkfire are going to be the best guns for twisting, but really anything with an open mod slot works well enough. Very versatile, very reliable, and Bleed is also the best status for energized netcoil builds as well, which can do some crazy stuff. The only downside is Bleed was hit with massive brick walls. All of those walls are in the second DLC. Whoever's bright idea was to make the entire part of that game immune to bleed, well, let's just say it wasn't such a bright idea, that's the nice way to put it. This mutator is completely useless against one really decent sized chunk of the game, but that is more of a bleed problem than this mutator really. And there you have every single ranged mutator ranked in Remnant 2. As you can see, there are very few useless options, with far more per se OP options. This was an amazing mechanic to add into Remnant 2 as it makes weapons feel really personalized compared to From the Ashes. And that's gonna be it from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.